Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, I'm joined by Teagasc researcher Nicky Byrne to discuss if red clover has a role on Irish beef farms and to find out about the upcoming National Beef Conference taking place on the 13th of December in the Shearwater Hotel, Ballinasloe at 6 p.m. Nicky, you're very welcome. Given the rising costs of fertiliser and feed, for beef farmers, what do you see as the benefits to red clover?
There's many benefits of red clover, and I suppose you pointed out the direct economic benefit because of red clover's ability to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and make it available to plants grown in the soil. So obviously that can displace, expensive fertilizer out of our beef production systems, but not only, displacing that fertilizer, we know that there's potential benefits in terms of animal performance on the back of including red clover in their diets. So really, it's a combination of reducing the nitrogen imported into our farms in the form of chemical fertilizer, reducing the need to import other protein sources in the form of concentrate to be fed to our animals. And also we can get higher levels of animal performance potentially from including red clover in the diet. So a combination of, reducing the nitrogen brought into the system and still increasing or maintaining animal performance can improve the nitrogen balance, the farm gate nitrogen balance of our beef production system. So that's a really important credential, not only for the economics, but also for the environmental sustainability of our beef production systems.
Nicky, despite all those benefits, there's been limited uptake to red clover. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think one of the big limitations to the uptake of red clover in our farm systems was, historically, fertilizer inputs were relatively cheap in comparison to where they are now today. But not only that, there's more complex management required. And the reason there is a different type of management required is because of the agronomy of the red clover plant. So we know that the red clover plant, is probably a lot more vulnerable to physical damage by machinery or grazing animals. And it's that plant structural difference that kind of makes red clover more suited to intensive silage cutting rather than a grazing system. So that reduced grazing ability of a red clover, probably complicated it somewhat in terms of the management and the flexibility, to fit into our beef production systems, which typically, have a very blended approach between silage cutting and aftermath grazing. So, some of those differences, the reduced persistency, maybe 4 to 5 year lifespan of a red clover sward, has been one of the big off-putters because of the higher fixed costs associated with reseeding.
And so far this year, how have the red clover swards performed in Grange?
Yeah, so I suppose we have a range of red clover swards of differing ages. So if we just take, for example, the 2-year-old, the 2 to 3-year-old red clover swards that we have, and if we take and look at the total dry matter production produced from those swards, while managed under a zero chemical nitrogen 3-cut system, those swards have finished up with, producing, 19.3 tons dry matter across the year. But I suppose the big question we have is, how long can we sustain, over how many years can we sustain these high levels of dry matter production? And what is the animal response, from the herbage produced from these systems? That's what's of real interest to us, and to see, what the potential or the contribution to our overall farm system can be.
And following on from the 3-cut system, have them paddocks had to be grazed this year, or how have they been managed for the back end of the year? Because there's been good growth on farms.
Absolutely, yeah. So our system that we're implementing, it's incorporated into our dairy calf to beef production system that we have at Grange. And, what we found works best for us is a 3-cut silage system. So our first cut been taken in early May, and that's really important that the first cut is taken early. And there's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, you're going to have really good quality herbage in the earlier cutting dates, but you're also, allowing light penetrate the sward and encourage a higher percentage of clover for cuts 2 and 3. And we want to have that third cut, completed by early September. And then I suppose, look, we've had very good growth in the autumn of the last number of years, and this year was no exception. So we found ourselves, needing to go in and graze those swards. So we just grazed them. They're the last paddocks that we grazed this year. So we grazed them, from probably the 1st up to the 5th of December, cleaned off all the herbage on them. And there was probably a cover of 1,500 on them. So cleaned them off, and they're set up and ready to go for silage cutting next May. So they'll just receive 3,000 gallons of slurry come early February, and that'll be applied via low emissions slurry spreading technique. And that is the only nutrient application that those swards will receive, up for their first cut silage.
And you mentioned there the management that's required. How are they managed when the stock were grazing them?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, with any, crop that has a high percentage of legumes, be it red or white clover, we have to be extra diligent in how we manage that grazing to avoid or reduce the risk of bloat on those high clover crops. So really what we do, we make sure that animals, aren't restricted in their intake prior to going on to those red clover crops, and that avoids the risk of animals gorging themselves or actively selecting out the clover within the sward. Also what we do, we provide a fibre source. Look, the dry matter can be really low, in that late autumn, winter time when we're grazing these crops. So we provide a fibre source in the form of high quality barley straw. And we also probably, give 24-hour allocations to the animals to make sure they eat the entire sward offer, that they're not just selecting out the clover, that they eat the clover and the grass that's present. And also we do put bloat oil in the water. But look, at that time of the year with very low dry matter grass, maybe 14-15% dry matter, they're probably not drinking a lot of water. So you have to put in, a multiple management strategies to try and reduce the risk of bloat. But look, thankfully, we've had no issues because of the careful management and the good stockmanship that is going in put in place.
From the silage samples that you've taken for the red clover, how have them results compared to either the grass only silage or the grass clover silage that you'd have made around the same time?
Yeah, so look, it varies quite a bit. If we take the first cut in early May, we have to take into account that there's a lower clover proportion at that time of year. So our first cut red clover silage is about 37% red clover. It's cut in early May, and it's probably very comparable to our first cut perennial ryegrass only sward. The only difference we would have seen in this year's samples and repeated across years is that although similar digestibility in the first cut, we see probably a lower crude protein value in our red clover silage at that time. And that's because of the nitrogen application. We must remember that there's no chemical nitrogen applied to our red clover plots. So they came back at 12.5% protein in the silage, whereas with the conventionally managed perennial ryegrass getting 100 units of chemical nitrogen for that first cut, they're coming back with maybe 14% crude protein. But we must remember that the nitrogen in our plants is an indirect measure of our crude protein value. So that probably is one thing. There's probably better quality protein in our red clover silage crops, and maybe more protein available for production in the animal, but just the crude values might seem a little bit lower. But we have to understand how these proteins interact with the animal and how they become available at a later stage. If we move on to the second and third cuts, we can see really, really high percentages of clover. We're up on 88% red clover on a dry matter basis in those second and third cut silages. And we do see, probably up on 16% crude protein on our grass crops, and lower in our perennial ryegrass only. And also what we did see, at that very high level of clover, we have seen that there is a reduction in the digestibility of that silage. And that probably is expected. If we just imagine the red clover plant, you can see it, a very tall upright sward. And for that sward structure, there's a lot of fibrous material within the clover plant to support that plant structure. And we probably capture that a little bit in the pit. But, we don't want to underestimate the how that clover breaks down, or that fiber breaks down in the animal, is somewhat different to our perennial ryegrass. And, despite the lower digestibility at times, we can see higher levels of dry matter intake, which in turn can support similar or increased animal performance in a lot of cases. So that's one of our big questions that we'll be testing out this year and next year on weanlings and on finishing cattle is, what is the intake potential of these red clover silages? What is the animal performance that is possible? What's the conversion efficiency of these animals in terms of the feed they eat and turning that into additional carcass gain? Those are a lot of the big questions we have, around red clover, and to try and get a better understanding of it.
From the research that you've done so far, Nicky, and from the research project that you've outlined, in your opinion, has red clover a role on beef farms?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, there's a massive role on every farm. So it's not only, it's across all types of beef systems of high, low, and medium intensity. There's a role for red clover. And, if we look at the economics, Peter Doyle, our grassland researcher here at Teagasc Grange, has compared, our 3-cut red clover system to a 2-cut silage system in terms of the economic benefits of it. And I suppose, Peter has identified, the different strategies that we can optimize to improve the economic return from red clover. But if we just start off at a basic comparison, there's probably a €3.30 advantage per bale of a red clover system over a conventional grass 2-cut system. But we know that if we can, make better use of our animal slurry and go to an all slurry red clover system, that economic advantage of the red clover increases up to €6.30 per bale. And then if we can improve the persistency of these red clover swards from 4 years up to 6 years, we can get that economic advantage up to €8.30 a bale. And if we saw, an increase in fertilizer price, which, is quite possible, if we saw that go up by 25% again, that would actually, push that economic advantage of a red clover bale of silage, €10 ahead of where our perennial ryegrass bale is. So look, there's an economic potential there, just a direct comparison, but that isn't taken into account the potential for extra animal performance. And I think, combination of those, if the management can be got right and optimized and really tailored to suit the red clover plant, I think we can really, there's an untapped potential there for every type of ruminant production system in Ireland at the moment.
Nicky, you'll be covering this in more detail next week at the Teagasc National Beef Conference in the Shearwater Hotel, Ballinasloe, next Tuesday, the 13th of December at 6 p.m. What's in store on the night?
Yeah, so look, on the night, we're going to outline, what the potential, the limitations, and the opportunities that exist with including red clover into your beef production system. And myself and Peter Doyle will be there on the night, to take any questions from the audience, and just, to give farmers the information to help make a very informed decision, whether or not red clover has a role on their beef farm. And we'll also hear, some farmers' experiences that have incorporated red clover, from Martin Connolly in Roscommon. He's incorporated some red clover into his dairy beef production system. So we'll hear, some of Martin's experience as well, how he's finding it, why he's chosen red clover, and what it's delivering for him. In store on the night, we'll have a range of speakers, delivering really detailed papers on different technologies that can help improve, their farm businesses. And I suppose that's going to begin with Dr. Paul Crossan, our beef enterprise leader here at Teagasc Grange, who's going to go through the key profit drivers of our beef production systems. We'll have Dr. Natasha Murnier from Animal Health Ireland. We'll discuss, the importance of animal health and what that can mean to our businesses. And we've Dr. Colin Byrne, who's going to, outline, the importance of reducing that age at first calving in our heifers, in our suckler beef systems. And obviously, we're going to talk about red clover and how it can complement some of these other technology areas in improving overall farm profits. And the evening will close with a panel discussion that's going to focus on how to deliver, greater sustainability at farm level as well.
That's great. Thanks, Nicky. Further details are available on the Teagasc website, and the link will be provided in the podcast text on the upcoming National Beef Conference.
Thanks, Catherine, and we look forward to speaking to everyone on the night.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Nicky for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.